Hey everybody, and welcome to the channel. HTM here, and in this video we'll be reviewing every class currently available in the Elder Scrolls Online and ranking them for solo gameplay. First of all, yes, you can solo much of the content in this game that is actually meant for groups, including 4-player dungeons or arenas, which can be a great option if your friends aren't online, you want to farm XP or gear, or you just want to challenge yourself. Soloing in ESO is a totally viable playstyle, and it's one of my favorite ways to play the game, but some classes do it better than others. So if you want to know the best classes, both stamina-based and Magicka-based, for soloing the most difficult content in the game, stick around because the entire list is starting now. So let's start off in the C tier for solo builds. These classes are not bad to play necessarily. In fact, let me clarify that there are no bad classes in the Elder Scrolls Online. Classes in this tier just don't shine above others in terms of solo gameplay. I would consider them to be average, basically. These builds might lack consistent sources of passive healing or survivability options, which are some of the most important things when it comes to solo gameplay, or they might have some issues with resource sustain. Either way, you can definitely improve on these builds using your own skill as a player or by using strong gear set options, mythic items, or even companions, which are getting added now for the Blackwood chapter. But just on the basic level, these builds are slightly more challenging to play. Now let's start off by talking about the Stamina Dragonite. This class actually excels at damage over time and has easy access to Major Breach through the Noxious Breath skill line, which can increase your solo damage output even further. But the class is still somewhat weak when it comes to self-healing, especially early on at lower levels. You do eventually pick up a great class heal over time called Cauterize, which Stamina Dragonites can use, and I definitely recommend this one since it lasts a full 15 seconds. But it's actually one of the last skills you will get. Now, to help with healing early on, I recommend leveling up the Fighters Guild skill line on your Stam DK to unlock skills like Rune of Preservation for the minor protection buff, as well as a nice heal over time, and even the Camouflage Hunter ability for the minor Berserk, which increases your damage even further. You'll also likely want to unlock Vigor from the Alliance War skill line for additional healing. On the positive side for the Stam DK, you do have some very strong ultimates that also restore your resources through the Battle Roar passive, so make sure you use those as frequently as possible. Stamina Dragonites also have the Molten Armaments ability, one of the few buffs to heavy attacks in the game, so a heavy attack focused playstyle using something like a two-handed weapon is definitely worth considering on a Stam DK. Next up on the C tier will be the Stamina Nightblade. Stam Nightblade is one of the most popular classes to play in ESO, but it's also one of the most challenging to play, and especially to play solo. While you can cloak up or sneak to assassinate single enemies one at a time, Nightblades can struggle when fighting against groups because most of their best damaging abilities are single target skills, and they also lack when it comes to defense, with their only armor ability coming from a passive skill. To counter this, you'll want to supplement your build with AoE weapon skills like the two-hand ability Brawler, which also gives you a free damage shield, or dual-wield skills like Deadly Cloak, which also gives you passive defense, or Whirling Blades, which is an AoE execute ability. Similar to Stamina Dragonite, Stamina Nightblade also suffers a bit in the area of self-healing and resource management. However, you can improve your healing and sustain slightly by using the Leeching Strikes ability from the Siphoning skill line. This skill heals you based on your light and heavy attacks while also restoring stamina, so it will be important to throw in those weapon attacks as much as possible. For healing, you might also want to pick up Rally from the two-handed skill line for access to a quick burst heal, or you can grab the PvP Assault skill Vigor again to add a strong heal over time to your kit. Moving on to the B tier next. These class specs are above average and offer more class-based options for healing and defense. And while still not being easy mode right out of the box, if you put in the work to learn these classes inside and out, they can still perform very well for you in places like veteran content and arenas. First, in our B tier list, we have the Magicka Nightblade. Magblades provide average damage and sustain, but above average healing and utility. The Magicka Nightblade's main range spammable Swallow Soul can be extremely useful for soloing, as it can hit hard with the proper amplifiers and then also heals you back for a percentage of the damage caused. Magicka Nightblades have an equally powerful AoE spammable ability that also heals them, called Sap Essence. The base heal on this ability is fairly low, but it does ramp up with the more enemies that you hit. Keep in mind too that the Magicka Nightblade does not have a class burst heal option for themselves, so you will need to keep your heal over times running constantly to ensure your survival, which makes them a bit more challenging to play. To help with this, you might also want to throw in the light armor damage shield dampen magic. Now in terms of their damaging abilities, Twisting Path is a nice option for AoE damage on your back bar and also provides a nice speed boost, making Nightblades a very fast class. They do have a class execute ability too, but you need to wait until the enemy is below 25% health to use it. Magblades also have an easy AoE source of minor vulnerability, thanks to the Lotus Fan skill, which also serves as a great gap closer, letting you cross distances quickly. Again, mobility, definitely a strong point for Magicka Nightblade. Now, unfortunately, the main debuff for this class, the Summon Shade ability, has been nerfed recently, as the minor maim debuff now only debuffs enemy damage by 5% instead of 15%. But this is going to be true for all versions of this debuff for all classes. Still, this was a nice piece of the Magicka Nightblade toolkit for solo builds, which is going to be less powerful now than it was before. Next up, we have the Magicka Dragonite. Mag DK scores slightly higher than Stamina, mostly due to its greater accessibility to class-based burst heals and heal over time. For example, Burning Embers is a percent-based heal, which does more healing based on how much damage it does. So just like Magicka Nightblade, Mag DKs can be simple in terms of healing because your main damaging ability also heals you back. Just make sure to always apply it to at least one enemy and recast it on that enemy again anytime you need to heal. You also have Coagulating Blood for healing and Draw Essence, which does AoE damage and heals you at the same time. For survivability on the Magicka Dragonite, make sure you take a look at the Ferocious Leap ultimate because it's cheap, does outstanding damage, and gives you a huge damage shield, which is going to be great for soloing bosses. You can also run the Dragonite Standard ultimate, which buffs your damage while also reducing incoming damage at the same time. Moving on to the A tier for solo builds, all of these are very strong choices for soloing most of the content in the game. If I were to fault them, it would be that they're a bit more complex, which just makes them more difficult to play than our S tier builds. But again, once you invest the time in these classes to learn them completely, you will find them very powerful and rewarding to play. First off, we have the Stamina Templar, which has actually moved up this year in my opinion. They still have many strong buffs and passives from the Templar class line, as well as some decent stamina morphs of abilities, which makes it a great solo option. First, Biting Jabs is a strong spammable ability, though not nearly as strong as the Magicka morph of the same ability, which heals you, though Jabs does give you a passive weapon critical bonus and minor protection, which is great. Stamina Templars also have Power of the Light, which is a great burst DPS tool that also debuffs the enemy. And finally, Stamina Templars have two excellent sustain skills in Repentance and Restoring Focus, meaning you can build for very high damage on the Stamina Templar without having to worry about your stamina sustain. Now, the Stam Templar does have access to a Magicka-based heal over time in Extended Ritual, which can be a lifesaver. This actually increases in power based on your highest offensive stat, which means that even though it is a Magicka-based skill, it can be a very strong healing option for a stamina build. I do definitely recommend slotting this for tougher content. And this year, Restoring Focus got an additional heal over time component added to it as well, which means Stamina Templars now have two passive heals, which they can easily stack together. Now, the only issue here is you must stay inside your runes to get those heals to work, so stay in that house if you want to receive the healing, or just recast the runes again at your new location if needed. Next up, we have the Stamina Warden class, one of the strongest stamina specs in the game due to its overwhelming amount of buffs and debuffs. Your main issue on the Stamina Warden will probably be deciding which buffs to run, because there are just so many. Our main spammable on this build, Subterranean Assault, provides a massive burst of AoE damage. We can also debuff groups of enemies with the Growing Swarm skill, which provides AoE minor vulnerability. And of course, there's Ice Forgers, one of the best armor buffs in ESO, which combines our major resistances with the minor protection buff for extra damage mitigation. Stamina Wardens are equally good as a two-handed build or dual-wield build, depending on your preference, though actually some of my favorite Stam Warden setups use bow exclusively. I definitely recommend checking those out. In terms of weaknesses for the Stamina Warden class, their ultimate abilities are a bit lackluster for solo content. The best class-based option here is probably the bear pet called Wild Guardian. He does very solid damage, both AoE and single target, and even without the damage, it's just cool to have a giant bear following you into battle. From Stamina Warden, let's continue on to the Magicka Warden class, which is a very similar setup. We have many great buffs and debuffs, almost mirrored from the Stamina Warden. I think in terms of raw healing and survival, Magicka Warden is slightly stronger because they have more heals they can run more consistently, since most of them cost magic to cast. For example, both morphs of the Living Vine skill are amazing and can keep you alive through almost anything. Then you also have better access to great AoE damage with our Frost magic abilities like Winter's Revenge. Many of these also inflict the Shield status effect on enemies, which will make them hit you for less damage, and can also apply the new Minor Brittle debuff, making them take more critical damage. So a crit damage focused Ice Mage can be a very powerful option for solo play. But again, I think it's a very close call between Stamina and Magicka Warden, and it may just come down to which style you like between the two. Up next is Stamina Necromancer. The Necromancer class in general benefits from some of the strongest passives in the game. For example, they get tons of sustain and recovery for free, extra bonus max health without having to slot any abilities, and bonus crit chance while slotting Gravelord skills. Now, in terms of their active abilities, Blast Bones can hit as hard as an ultimate and is very cheap to cast, and Archer and Siphon provide strong passive damage. Necromancers also have the Scythe skill, which does AoE damage and heals at the same time, which is exactly what you want on a solo build. Stamina Necro also has great passive defense, thanks to Spirit Guardian, and better healing than most Stamina builds, thanks to the strength of Mortal Coil. And of course, who could forget one of the best ultimates in the game, Pestilent Colossus, which provides tons of damage and major vulnerability. And speaking of ultimate, both Stamina and Magicka Necromancers can use Necrotic Potency to gain their ultimates back quicker than any other class in the game. The only downside, I would say, to Necromancers is buff management, and that's still what keeps them out of the S tier in my opinion. Necromancers are just hard to master, with all of their buffs having relatively short durations compared to other classes, and some abilities requiring corpses on the ground, which adds an extra element of challenge to the class. But if you can get all of this down with enough practice, then the solo possibilities on Necros are pretty much limitless. Now, as far as the Magicka Necromancer is concerned, the benefits and drawbacks are nearly identical to that of the Stamina Necromancer. These two are very close. Obviously, Mag Necro is going to have access to the Magicka versions of most of the same skills. They'll have all of the same passives, with the same downside here of buff management and rotation. Now, as far as the main difference between Stamina and Magicka Necro, I'd say it really comes down to your playstyle and specifically which weapons you want to use for combat. Magicka Necromancer will obviously be focused on Destruction Staff. You can easily put on an Ice Staff for better defensive options and play a Grim Reaper style build, or you can play with a Fire Staff for more damage. Either way, you'll probably be playing as a ranged build as opposed to Stamina Necromancer, which will most likely be using dual wield or two-handed weapons in melee range. The other nice thing about Magicka Necromancer is that you can easily swap in a Restoration Staff and occasionally play as a group healer if you want to take a break from solo content. Alright, so here we are, finally arriving at the S tier of solo builds. Not only are these classes extremely strong options for solo PvE, but each of them also has so much healing and so many great defensive options that they are essentially easy mode for most solo encounters. Of course, in more difficult situations like Maelstrom Arena or Vatistrand Hollows, you still need to learn mechanics, but these specs make it so much easier to do so, even when you make mistakes. Starting off the S tier, we have the Stamina Sorcerer class, what I consider to be the strongest solo stamina build in the game. And while somewhat limited in terms of its passive abilities that are useful, those they do have are incredibly powerful, including reduced cost of abilities and reduced cost of ultimates, as well as strong passive stamina and health recovery, and even passive healing now from the Dark Magic skill line. For sustain, Stamina Sorcerers can recycle any unused Magicka back into stamina and health using Dark Deal, and Stamina Sorcerers have the highest potential stamina pool in the game thanks to extra stam provided by bound armaments, which also does damage for them. Hurricane is another amazing ability which grants you armor, movement speed, and does AoE damage all within one skill. And finally, Stamina Sorcerers do have access to the best passive heal in the game, Critical Surge, which heals you for lots of health back every second as long as you're doing damage, which of course you will be all the time thanks to abilities like Hurricane, combined with other damage over time effects from things like weapon skill lines. It's this combination of damage and healing that makes Stamina Sorcerers an unstoppable force in ESO, letting them easily solo almost any content in the game. Next up, we have the Magicka Sorcerer class, and much like Stam Sorc, Mag Sorcs have great passives for cost reduction and recovery. They can also trade stamina back for health and magicka with dark conversions. Now in terms of defense, Magicka Sorcerers have essentially the strongest damage shield in the game in the Hardened Ward skill, and can gain even more passive magicka and resistances with the Bound Armor ability. Finally, if you're looking for the ultimate easy mode build, try summoning 3 pets, a Familiar, a Twilight, and the Atronach Ultimate, all of which can do damage for you while you focus on other things, like keeping yourself alive or just spamming heavy attacks. And then of course there's the healing of the Magicka Sorcerer, some of the strongest in the game. Of course they have Crit Surge just like Stam Sorc, which is basically immortality, especially when combined with your damage shields. But then you also have burst heals from 2 of your different pets, just in case you need it, making Pet Sorcs an extremely strong, versatile, and easy option for solo content. Finally, let's talk about my main class, my number 1, the Magicka Templar, an absolute powerhouse of self-healing, AoE damage, and defense. First off, Templar's main spammable Puncturing Sweep heals them for a percentage of the damage done. So much like Sorcerers, as long as Magicka Templars are doing damage, they are also being healed at the same time. This is without a doubt the strongest spammable ability for solo in the game. Templars also have multiple AoE damage effects like Blazing Spear, Reflective Light, Solar Barrage. All of these you can combine with your Puncturing Sweep to do massive amounts of AoE damage. And then let's talk about Radiant Glory, the Templar Execute. This starts scaling at 50% enemy health, and it also heals you at the same time. This thing is crazy good. The Templars also have an amazing burst heal called Honor the Dead that also refunds magicka. Templar passives are also extremely strong for even more healing and defense. We're talking about non-stop minor protection as well as minor mending, making you take less damage and heal for even more. Now Templars even got an additional buff for solo play this year now that their rune skill also heals them while standing in it, in addition to the extra healing you can get from other skills like Extended Ritual. So all in all, Templars are pretty much the ultimate healer / damage dealer combo that you can get in PvE, making them a great option to solo any content that you want in the game. And with that said, that's going to wrap up our list of the best classes for soloing in the Elder Scrolls Online. Hope you guys enjoyed this one and found it informative. And of course, if you did, don't forget to crush that like button, hit that subscribe button to see more videos just like this, and don't forget to turn on those notifications so you don't miss anything. If you'd like to see more about any of the solo builds I showcased in this video, there will be links down in the description and the pinned comment below, so check those out if you are interested. And as always, thank you all so much for watching. I hope you're doing well. Stay safe out there, and I will see you around in the next video.